One whole area in your book that there wasn't time for tonight, but now there is what you draw from games, and the history of games and all of that in this regard.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that because you are a character in that part of the book. I'm sure that wasn't why you asked, but so it's another side of the history of computing that's really interesting is how important, in addition to music, how important games are to the history of computing. And one of my favorite stories in the book, actually, and I went back to the Computer History Museum down in Menlo Park and experienced this firsthand with my son, is the story of the game Space War, which you play a role in. And Space War was this game, really the first true kind of thing that we would recognize as a video game that was created in 1961 by a bunch of, we would call them now hackers from MIT. And they had this new extraordinary computer that had a monitor. This was the big breakthrough. And so they were trying to figure out, they could show graphics. It was the PDP-1. And they were trying to figure out we've got this monitor, like what are we going to do with it? And they were like, well, what if we created a game, a kind of a space-themed game? And so they create this game, which is really the antecedent of Asteroids, if some of you remember Asteroids. And this thing kind of takes off, and you could make the argument it's one of the most important pieces of software written in the 60s because it kind of develops open source style through the 60s, and this code is passed around, and all these innovations start to happen. It's one of the first examples where you see an avatar representing yourself on the screen that you can control. So it's a predecessor in a way of a kind of a mouse icon or so on, or a pointer.
Well, it was also one of the early pushers of time sharing. Because they were trying to make these big, basically mainframe and then so-called mini computers act like a personal computer.
And people would add all these features to it. Like one guy created this program called Expensive Planetarium, which recreated the night sky accurately. It's one of the first times in a kind of non-military application you had actual realistic renderings of reality on a computer screen. Again, for no purpose whatsoever. It actually added nothing to the game whatsoever. It was just stars kind of in the background. And what it then eventually, it kind of, it's one of the first, in a sense, open source software projects as well. So all these ideas that become crucial to computing develop out of it. But then one of the things that happens is this kid, Stuart Brand, goes and organizes a Space War Olympics at Stanford and writes about it for Rolling Stone. And through watching these people with this rapturous relationship to this game on the screen, he begins to think, as he writes, computers are coming to the people. And then the next line of that article is, that's the best news since psychedelics, because it was 1972, whatever.
Turned out to be way better news than psychedelics.
So here you have this game, and yet it ended up playing a really kind of defining role in the history of computers in that period.